Yeah, thanks. It affords me great pleasure to be moderating from this wonderful living word in Brumeria, Pretoria. When I thought about this session, I was hoping that somebody will come to the fore to develop for us a wow spirituality. I don't know what that would be, but my only response to what I've experienced these 2 days is wow. This afternoon we shall dwell a little bit on the very pertinent question, how can we nurture the new spiritualities that are emerging in this season? Is it a her spirituality, H-E-R spirituality? And for that purpose, we've lined up three experts, and I have to apologize up front for Wilna de Beer, who cannot be with us, who cannot participate in this. It's a real pity. But we understand that there are circumstances beyond her control preventing her from participating in all of this. It affords me great pleasure now to introduce to you our panel of experts, starting with Bevel Lucas, who is the coordinating leader of Reclaim the City. And is a resident and occupation leader of their biggest land justice occupation case in Cape Town. The place where they stay is called Sissy Gould House, and it is where the old Woodstock Hospital at the moment, with about 700 occupants. So welcome, Bevel.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I am very pleased to be able to share my experiences with everybody, and to be able to make a link between what I refer to very often as life and faith and life, and faith as a way of life rather than just as a spiritual aspect of one's life. So I hope my experiences would be able to contribute to our discussion here today.
Great stuff. It also affords me great pleasure to now give you also Carol Nganga. She's a community worker and public theologian with a very specific focus on bringing faith leaders together with people dealing with, or the lawyers for human rights, people dealing with grassroots human rights issues, bringing them together in the fight for greater social justice. She has founded a wonderful organization which is called the Msingi Trust, which aims at empowering people for their struggle for social justice and social transformation. It gives me pleasure to welcome you, Carol.
Thank you, Nico. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to have been in conversation with my friends and family from South Africa, Uganda, all over, and my Kenyan siblings as well, discussing about this. And to see Uncle Bevel, I don't know if you remember that we visited you last year as part of the LUT class from last year. So it's an honor to be in conversation with you as well.
Great stuff, yeah.
Yes.
We also have on the panel Jude, He doesn't want me to call him Father Jude, but he is indeed Father Jude, who is the partnerships coordinator of the Institute for Urban Ministry. He's doing excellent work in the urban studio. Is connected to the Center for Faith and Community in the Faculty of Theology at the University of Pretoria. And on top of that, he is the group leader for South Africa in the Congregation of the Holy Spirit, or as they call themselves, Spiritans. He is very much involved in the advancement of interreligious dialogue and has got a great passion for the JPIC, which is basically justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. Welcome, Jude.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nico, and good afternoon, friends. What an exciting journey it has been this day and a half, listening to different experiences and expressions of faith from different parts of the world, and the learning journey as well. So thank you for this opportunity to be part of this conversation as we try to develop and advance new imaginaries with regard to issues of social justice and healing in our cities and communities.
Yeah, great stuff, Jude. I was wondering since yesterday whether there is a spirituality of ambivalence emerging, a spirituality of being in the city but being marginalized, not being part of the city. What kind of spirituality is that? Is there a spirituality of proximity emerging, or if you may want to call it a spirituality of the magnifying glass? Is there a spirituality of all of the issues that with incarnation emerging? I've got a set of 5 questions, and we will see how quickly we can work through it. What I want us to do is I will pose the first question and then give each of the panelists an opportunity to respond. And then I will go on to the next question, and so on and so on. My first question is, what is a real life spirituality? A spirituality that is being lived out, not something that is pietistic only, but that is lived out and that is practiced in real life, practiced in relationship with others. I wonder what your response would be to that kind of question. Bevel?
Okay. All right. Are we okay to go? Okay. Yeah. For me, when I became involved in the youth movement called the Young Christian Workers, we developed a pedagogy called See, Judge, Act. Very often in the judge component, we would look at what does it mean to be in a situation that is unjust, to be in a situation that warrants some action to be taken. How is that going to be? And what would the outcome be of participating in that unjust situation to try and find a way to correct that unjust, and how by participating in that in the undoing of that unjust situation, how does your spirituality and your being become part of a process to participate in an act of justice, an act of restoration, an act of hope for many people. Many years ago, I was involved in a project called Many in the City Are My People. It was with a priest called Jean-Marc from the YCW, looking at working people in Brits, particularly who had to commute between Brits and Pretoria industrial areas, and what were the kind of actions they would be involved in. Many of them were involved in the trade union movement. Many of them were involved in community actions. But the reflective part was, how do we, in a sense, spread a gospel of giving people hope, spreading a gospel of participation, giving a gospel of engagement, to believe in a future. For many of us who were active in the anti-apartheid movement, the aspect of hope, the aspect of justice was an integral part of our way of being, was a daily living experience. So it's within that context that I also became involved here in the occupation in what is referred to as the Sissyboel House, where many people who have been displaced, who have lost homes, who have lost their spaces of accommodation, were either to be on the street. And so we create this community here in Sissyboel House that deals with many different things. But we also try to find a space where spirituality of being becomes an important aspect. So whilst we a congregation of a particular community, we also try to create a space where that congregation is a multifunctional congregation, a congregation that restores people's confidence in humanity, a congregation that gives people hope of a future, but to do it from a spiritual consciousness is not very easy, but it's not impossible. And it's constantly trying to engage with that, how to propose, how to enable people to see that a new world is possible, even though it is challenging, but to find the space in which those challenges become a shared experience of neighborliness, a shared experience of conscious about who our neighbors are. And it's within that context that we try to restore people who have been displaced, people who might have become homeless, now have a space to restore each other's dignity in a way that there's a communal kind of congregation being shaped. So that is where and how I lived within the occupation in Sissyboel.
Great. Yeah, I know that each of the panelists comes into this with vast knowledge, vast experience. So, but I would want to plead that you keep it brief. Carol, you go.
All right, thank you. So, in terms of spirituality, I want to start from a feminist organizing principle that says the personal is political. And yesterday we had, or today morning we had Stefan saying that theology and politics have to connect. And so for me, in response to this question, I'd like to connect the three and say that the personal is political and therefore needs to be theological. And so we need to create our spiritualities in such a way that they connect in such ways so that it becomes liberative. And in so we are able to move as as pastors, as community leaders, as teachers, we move between the sanctuary, the streets, and the seminary, so that that spirituality is able to be one that holds our community and holds it together for justice and for the liberation of all.
Great. Jude, your turn.
Thank you so much. I think it is an intriguing thing to think of spirituality in terms of action as well. And looking at the theme, do you see her from the Gospel of Luke 7:44? I'm attracted also to the same Gospel 18:41, where they brought a blind man to the Lord, and he said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he answered, "Lord, that I may see." So I see a spirituality that talks to a mystery that attracts and calls us to realize the presence of God in our communities. A spirituality that is a motivating factor and a realization of the communitarian, if we understand it in terms of Trinitarian theology, of the communitarian nature of our humanity, to give us possibilities that are life-enhancing and life-giving. And the spirituality that motivates us now to begin to see, as this man said to the Lord, to begin looking at the cycle that we heard from yesterday of creating space, of recognizing, of discerning, of building, and in fact of nurturing, a spirituality that will help us to nurture what we have seen, what we have observed, but also pushes us to action, to ask fundamental questions about the status quo. It's a spirituality I see that calls us to action. In other words, to be a Christian is to be a man or a woman who purposely decides and intentionally makes an option for the poor and the most vulnerable in society.
Wow, that's why I was wondering right at the start whether somebody may want to develop a wow spirituality. My second question is on church. The sort of learned people would speak about ecclesiology. Let's just say church. So how does the church live out this kind of spirituality? It could be that you've already touched on this a little bit, but I would like you to be very explicit in terms of the kind of church you envisage that would espouse, that would embrace, that would embody a particular kind of spirituality. Bevel?
Yeah, I think if we look at it in the context of trying to create a just society, trying to create a space where there's hope and restoration of people's dignity, we would then want to begin to explore how a church is able to respond to those circumstances, is able to engage with those questions, to ensure that the congregation that it reaches out to becomes part of shaping that, part of making that, which is just, and which makes the connection of a spirituality that is accommodating, that is caring, and nurturing the congregation in a way that the community, I like some of the aspects in the book of Acts where it speaks to they have everything in common. And to be able to do that, it is very challenging. It's not impossible, but it is work in progress all the time. And to have a congregation that at least has the opportunity to participate, to reflect, and to have hope of making things better collectively.
Yeah, great. I should have, before you started responding, I should have made a comment on the notion of nurture or nurturing with its sort of two very basic components. On the one hand, it has the connotation of nourishment, and on the other hand, it has the connotation of nursing, to nurse something or to nurse somebody. And I suppose the second connotation would be very important, because quite often our spiritualities get bruised or even dislocated. So how do we nurse them? As we proceed, I would like you to also reflect on that a little bit, but I'd like to give Carol an opportunity to respond specifically to the question about the church.
Well, the church conversation really, like, it makes my heart sore, because what the church is meant to be on paper is not what it is in practice. And I feel that I sense, and this is because I'm called for the church and my work is for the church, but I feel that we need an emptied church, one that is not internal looking, but one that seeks to serve the ones who would least benefit it, and that the one who will not come back and say, who will not help us with the 10 million bond that we need. So for me, when you ask me that question, I'm looking at empty pews, because the people are outside, because the church is bigger than the institution, and we know that. A church that has any allegiance to the state, a church that is siding always with her, the Holy Spirit, her, the unseen, her, the unheard, her, the smelly person. So it's a church of the unseen. But if we are there, we are all smelly and we are all dirty, because we are serving together. We are together in the mud.
Deeply moved by what you say, Carol. Shall we also now give Jude an opportunity to respond? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Permit me to build on what my co-panelists have said, Bevel and Carol, and also to draw from what the Catholic tradition called the Second Vatican Council, where they defined the church as the people of God. And I think it falls exactly into what Carol was saying. The church not as structures as we see them, but as the people of God. In other words, all those who are created in the image of and likeness of God are people of God. But a church also that, if I can borrow from the late president of Burkina Faso called Thomas Sankara, a church that is ready to reimagine and reinvent itself. A church that listens. You know, yesterday we were talking about, the air we breathe. A church that asks itself, what air did I inhale in 2020 with the restrictions of COVID-19? Then a church at the same time asks herself, what breath am I exhaling within this period of COVID-19? In other words, a church that is not static, a church that is not monolithic, but a church that understands that spirituality renews itself and is open to asking itself certain questions without having categories of inclusivity and exclusivity. But finally, also, Nico and dear friends, a church that puts into practice the methodology that we use for this consultation. A church that looks at her location and asks herself, do I see her? Do I see the vulnerable people? Do I see the poor people? Do I see the homeless? Do I see those living in informal settlements? A church that is also able to ask itself, what are the incarnational footprints that are present in these communities? In other words, a church that recognizes the spirituality that is already alive in these informal communities. A church that doesn't condemn the homeless, but sees the homeless as a resource for reviving itself. A church that understands that indeed every person, including those on the margins, will contribute to social cohesion. And finally, Nico, without taking much time, a church that understands what in the Catholic tradition our Pope says, a church that will smell like the sheep it pastures.
Wow. Sure. Yeah. At home, they were laughing at me, thinking that I've gone completely crazy when I last night walked around the house and chanted something like CRDBN spirituality. I think that's the spirituality that is evolving from this consultation. Create, recognize, discern, build, nurture. We are talking about nurturing, particularly this afternoon. My next question is whether you think that we, through COVID-19, it's been alluded to, we have lost something as far as our spirituality is concerned, or also what do you think that we've gained something? Was there a deepening of spirituality or a hauling out of spirituality? Bevel?
Yeah, I would want to respond in two ways. One in the negative and the other in the positive. I think we were probably fortunate in the occupation in that we did a lot of education work prior to the institution of the lockdown regulations. So we were able to communicate and to educate people and so. So when I was tested positive, I had to go into isolation. And when I returned back into the occupation, there was a stigma that was attached to me having contracted the virus. But on the other hand, when I was declared positive, we collectively made the decision that it would be best for me to go into isolation as a means to show people that this thing is real. There is something that we have to do to ensure everybody is protected as best as possible. So under COVID-19, there were different experiences that you had to go through to determine how it affected you as an individual, but also how it affected you as a community. One of the biggest challenges that I think we as a society had to face is how do we find ways to lend support to each other in many ways, and how also do we in a way maintain our isolation to avoid contracting or spreading the virus. So there were situations where our spirituality was constantly having to be tested, having to be reviewed in many ways at the individual level, but also as a communal level. So I would say that there were lessons to be learned about the negating of having contracted the virus, but there are also more important lessons to be learned how communities responded to build a community and all the different aspects, including the faith and spirituality, under very, very testing times. The fact that many families could not say goodbye to the loved ones, that must have been really a very painful, but it was also a testing time as to how I, as a person of faith, how do I navigate that challenge that is being placed upon our society, but also how I navigate it as an individual. So there were real tests that had to be endured during the height of the pandemic.
Carol?
From an outsider, I think I hope that in terms of the institutions, that churches started asking themselves about their buildings and what they do with them, apart from Sunday. Because if the main reason that we maintain buildings is for the Sunday gathering, then what do we do with them when there's no Sunday gathering? That's first. And I know that there was some churches in Cape Town that opened up for the homeless, as quarantine facilities. So I'm aware that there are churches that were able to open up and do that. But I think for many church believers and people who love going to church on Sunday, there was a lot of questioning of what and why we have to do Sunday. So because it's a custom, it's a right that Sunday people wake up and go to church. Once there was no that pressure, I know that many of my friends, many people whom I know have started questioning this, have started asking what Sunday means. And many of my pastor friends are very worried about what it means when church opens up, because one, they might not come back, and two, they've explored other ways of getting closer to God, because there's people who've gone to parks, there's people who've started family meetings and family churches. There are communities who in a block of flats started a church community. And so that is what has happened over COVID, that there has been a stirring of the imagination of what church can be. And there has been a question of what church isn't because of the protection of the church space. And so many questions. And there is the wise and foolish virgins. And I know they are used in a different context, but the foolish pastor will be the one who goes back to church on Sunday as if it was normal. The foolish one is the one who thinks that, yes, we pressed pause for us in Kenya in March and we'll just start as it was. But people have changed, spiritualities have changed, questioning God in various ways has happened. We are asking many deeper life questions. And so, yeah, that's what I'm saying about Sunday, COVID, and yeah.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, time is running out. We'll, Father Jude.
Thank you so much. We also realize that COVID-19 did not affect all of us equally the same way. And it had different expressions in different families. But the common thing I think that a lot of people agree on is that COVID introduced a new way of doing things. Some call it the new normal. It's a new way of even being mission, because in some countries the churches were locked, just as my co-panelists have said, and people now began to question. But within that, there is a new mandate that also comes. Do we encounter God and the power of the Holy Spirit within the walls of the church, or do we perhaps go outside to look at the people of God to whom God has revealed God's self? And in that way, we begin to realize that COVID-19 has also given us something positive, a form of conversion, a form of looking at spirituality in terms of the actions that we do outside. But then it also questioned our way of doing things. In other words, our present theology, our present pedagogy, and our present methodology, have they prepared us for responding to such crisis? And so it is interesting, for example, that Stefan de Beer, whom we listen to, will say that the city is a classroom. It's a place that will teach us a lot of things. It's a place that we can learn from. And within the Center for Faith and Community, as you mentioned, Prof. Nico, there is this possibility for upskilling ourselves, for preparing ourselves for future things like that. And the Institute of Urban Ministry also does that through its courses, Introduction to Urban Theology, starting and sustaining community projects and building leadership for the future, and the Center for Faith and Community through the Leadership in Urban Transformation and all other courses. What I'm talking about here is that this COVID-19 has also given us an opportunity to reskill ourselves, to revisit, our theological assumptions, and to begin to see the spiritualities that are expressed, especially in these new forms of encountering, God's incarnation in the cities, by acquiring these skills in terms of theological education that could help us to advance further.
Sure. I've got a final question, and perhaps your response might be that haven't we told you this yet? But I need to ask you the question, and I'm not a great fan of 4 keys for deepening our spirituality, my spirituality. But let's go there for a moment. And my question is sort of what will be the keys or dimensions to deepening of our spirituality, dimensions for the deepening of our spirituality to make it more sustainable in these very, very challenging times? Bevel?
Yeah, I think it's such an important and central aspect of our being at this point in time, to find those spaces of reflection, both at an individual level, as well as whatever opportunity may be at a collective level or at the communal level, at a congregational level, taking into account the challenges that would exist at the individual level, as well as at the communal and congregational level. I think one of the central questions I would pose is, what am I able to do to make things better in my community? And that better can be anything that I choose to participate in, and to find a way of making that I participate in a part of developing a deeper connection, a deeper commitment, a wider participation of connecting with others. One of the things that has certainly showed up under the current circumstances is our interfaith connection, our connection with others outside of the Christian denomination, how do we engage with it, with others around what is happening in our development of our spirituality, be that at the individual level, be that at the communal or congregational level also. It's work in progress all the time. It cannot be just a one shoe fits all, but to be open to different influences and how that would enable us to strengthen our congregations, our communities, and even us as individuals too.
Thanks. Carol, dimensions for deepening of our spirituality?
I think we might, incarnation and being deeply embedded in community and being church, not church for the community, but church with community, so that people in the community see that this is church. I don't know who keeps saying this, that if something was to happen to your church and it was going to be destroyed, would the community around you protest your eviction or protest your demolition? Many of us, our churches, the community would not necessarily protest that. So it is church with the community as part of the community, and proximity in terms of, as we've talked during this past 2 days, how close to this story are we? How close to her are we? And how humility to learn from her, and humility to learn from the fractures, to learn from the people whom you thought you would never learn from, to learn from the drug dealer, to learn, as we heard in the first session, from the family of the person who stole from you. But for me, the other one that I would say is that be ready to smell. Be ready to smell funny, and to also know that you smell funny, and come in that space with the humility of, I smell funny, you smell funny, come, let's smell funny together. And for me, that's the incarnation.
Glory to God. You know, this morning I put on a little bit of perfume because of this fear that I would not smell sort of well, nice. And we all have that fear not to smell. And yet I think you are right. This is exactly where God may want us to go, where the Creator Spirit, the Holy Spirit, may want to lead us. Jude?
Thank you so much. Just to add and build up on what was said already, I think a spirituality, to deepen it, this type of spirituality will require, permit me to say the word, revolutionary discipleship. I'm thinking, perhaps if it's okay, that to use the personal example, that I'm being challenged towards this revolutionary discipleship by, first of all, developing strategies that will help me to resist the injustices that are present in our communities. Not just to go into my own particular area to pray about it. Prayer is also good, it edifies the soul, but that I need to resist whatever structures that are there, and also to reclaim my agency as a disciple of Christ. And I think this is important in our journey as Christians. We are called to be stewards of God's creation. And I think the strategies that will help us is to learn to be disciples that are revolutionary, that resist injustices in whatever way we see it, and to reclaim our space as Christians within a community that sometimes, as has been said, may not recognize that. And also another way that this calls us is to deepen the collaboration amongst ourselves. Christians have been fighting with each other for too long. If we are in the same community, we can collaborate. We can work together for justice. We can't stop unnecessary and unhealthy competition, but perhaps let us compete in doing good. Let us compete in terms of advancing social justice in our communities.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you very much for now. God bless you. Over to you, Jen.